Hello, welcome. My name is William Bartlett. I work at a company called Triptych. I'm present on various different social media, and you can see my Twitter handle on all the slides of this slideshow. Right now, I just tweeted the slides so that you can go look at them. So if you look up my account on Twitter, there will be a link to a site called Noticed, where you'll be able to get the slides, and you'll also be able to get other useful links to see various information about what I'm going to talk about. I value your feedback. Please do tweet me constructive feedback so I can become a better and better speaker. A few other things to note about me. I have a long experience as a programmer. At the moment, I have several roles at Triptych, and a couple of them are being an agile coach and a DevOps consultant. I'm also a fan of ergonomics. I'm not an expert on ergonomics, but when I build something, I like it to be not only functional, but also useful, and to have a little bit of style. So now I've presented myself, it's time for the mandatory hand-raising time. Are you ready? Are you ready? Yep. Okay, cool. So I just want to make sure that everybody who wanted to come to my talk is at my talk. So I'd like for you, those of you who aren't yet here and would like to come, raise your hand, please. Okay, I think everybody's here. Now, I'd like for everybody who's watching me live online to raise your hand, please, now. Okay, thank you. Mum, you can put your hand down now. And finally, I'd like to get a feel for our future audience. So if you're watching online on YouTube in the days to come, months to come, please raise your hand right now. That's great. Thank you very much for that feedback. Now, this is not a talk about amazing UX. You're not going to see amazing animations and transitions. It's not about gorgeous graphic design either. And on the other side, it's not about fully loaded APIs. I'm not going to tell you how to do any of those things. What I am going to show you is a cool way of combining these. So if on your team you have people who are great at UX, people who are great at UI design, and who are great at building APIs, here's a way to combine the two. What do I mean? Well, let's start with where we are in the web API world at the moment. The API economy is booming. You're probably working at a company, working on APIs, and maybe at the moment you don't even know how many APIs your company has in production. But what are we using these APIs for? Why are we choosing to deliver certain services as web APIs? And are we using these APIs internally? Are they only being consumed by other people in the same company as us? Or are we also publishing them on the World Wide Web for all our customers to be able to interact with? And what tactics are we using to organize our API landscape? I say tactics as if it were football. And I think there's a little bit of a parallel between football tactics and maybe the ways that we decide whether to create or destroy an API or decommission an API. Which APIs are allowed to talk to each other, and whether we expose an API to the general public or not. In 2010, for the Football World Cup in South Africa, somebody, I couldn't find out who so I could credit them, gave a few different diagrams, funny diagrams, of the way that different national football teams played. And I think there's a bit of a parallel with the way that we sometimes structure our APIs. Maybe you heard of APIs and you started out with the English plan. Very direct. You're basically just trying to transition from a big monolith that was serving the UI on the server side and constructing it all on the server side to maybe a front end that was separate from the back end. And therefore, the communication between the two was using a web API. And then maybe that worked well and it evolved. It became a little bit more complex. You start getting several back-end APIs. They're all kind of communicating with each other as well. But then at some point, something's going to the front end for the user to see. And that's the Italian plan. And maybe things got really complex. And you started hearing about all these great best practices and 12-factor and TDD and DDD and whatever DD. And you thought, I have to have these. I have to play the API game the beautiful way, the Brazilian way. And then things got really carried away. And you started developing these great APIs, many APIs, so many that you can't even know how many are in production at a given time. And they're all calling each other and passing information, and everything's working. But you kind of lost sight of the goal. Who's going to score the goal after all these passes? Well, in this analogy, the goal is the end user. We're building these APIs for people, not for other APIs in the end. And let's face it, except for the geeks that are here, the end user usually consumes graphical user interface. Yes, it's great to expose our APIs for other people to then build upon them, but usually those other people are developers, and they're going to build other services that they're going to propose to their users. But in the end, something has to show up on a screen on a web page. One interesting way to keep teams focused on this end goal is to have them in it, to have them always reminded of it by having people who are doing the front-end design and the front-end implementation in the same team as the back-end. And so we're seeing, for the past few years, an emergence of what we call micro-frontends. We have end-to-end teams that are delivering a service, a completely single contained service. And the final user interface is simply an aggregation of all these services. And then you want to accelerate your growth, and you start looking at what APIs are already out there. And today there is an enormous amount of APIs that you can just take, you can buy and consume to help accelerate the construction of your own application. We have things from authentication as a service, storage, databases, and many different services that we can now consume. AI, machine learning. But what is the true cost of integrating these APIs into our application? They aren't necessarily targeting the end user since they're just data APIs. We got to bridge the gap. We got to go the last mile by developing parts of our UI, by integrating these APIs into our UI. And developing that interface is also part of the cost of integrating these third-party APIs. Now, I don't want to talk about that problem today. I want to talk about a very similar problem, but it's from the viewpoint of these third parties. Let's say you're developing an API and you want customers to consume that, to build on top of your API, to accelerate the development of their application. How are you going to help your customers seamlessly integrate your API into their UI? And I want to stress the word seamlessly, because maybe you could start developing a few components and you say to your customers, okay, there's the API that serves the data, and then here are some of the components you can integrate into your application. Yes, but maybe those components that you've developed, they don't quite fit the look and feel of your customer. And you can start maybe building custom-made versions of those UI elements for them and serve them on different URLs depending on the customer that is trying to fetch them. But there's definitely a problem with how do you make these white label elements that you can deliver alongside your API. And the solution I'd like to talk about today is having your API serve themable UI fragments. And we'll see how web components and a few other latest additions to the web platform can help us there. Now, this has all been done before. People are already doing this. There is nothing new under the sun. People are already embedding bits of UI from third-party services for hosting ads. There's a huge market at the moment for chatbots. You go on a website and you're looking for something, you're trying to grok what the website is giving you, where the links are, how it's organized, and suddenly somebody says, you see this little pop-up come up and say, "Hello, I'm Julian. I'd like to speak to you. What would you like to talk to me about?" Like, "Oh, hey, Julian, I didn't know you existed until a couple seconds ago. Yeah, I got some time to kill. Why don't we just chat? So what do you want to chat about? What's your life like? I don't understand the question. Can you please rephrase?" You see that more and more. And these are, if you look at the DOM, if you inspect the DOM of these websites, they're integrating third parties into that. And usually you can see in the style as well, in the iconography of these chatbots, you can tell, okay, that one's from that supplier, that one's from that supplier. And there's pretty much 2 or 3 horses in the race in that market. There's been a long time market for charts. Obviously, business intelligence is a huge thing, is very useful for making decisions. And often you have one piece of software that is very good at digesting all that information and presenting it in the form of a chart. And then suddenly the business people say, "Well, I don't want to flip from the custom ERP of this company to the business intelligence solution and back and forth and back and forth. Why can't I just integrate this chart into the application directly?" And that has already been done. We can also embed YouTube videos, Twitter feeds, Twitter tweets. And we can integrate authentication from a third party, payment, and finally, the one we love the most, we can help our customers be more GDPR compliant. As you can also see, there was a big market for that, and a couple companies were very good in delivering a solution that companies could just embed in their website, and suddenly, poof, they're GDPR compliant. And not just GDPR, it's also they're compliant with many different regulations that are similar regulations that are being put into place in other countries. And so we can just offload that concern to that company. And if you look again with the look and feel, some of the solutions are themable, but they're not all, and you can generally tell, okay, that's that provider, that's that provider. Now, how are they doing this? How are they integrating their UI into their customers? Well, they're using the oldest page in the book. And I'll show you this, and please don't laugh. Okay, you're not allowed to laugh. The most used solution for embedding somebody's UI in your own is an iframe. And why is it an iframe? Well, because it works. It works pretty damn well. And another reason is that there really isn't any other solution at the moment. And so the iframe lives on. Despite numerous articles talking about how limited they are in the API that they provide, how limited they are in the security that they provide. And there have been efforts to think about, well, maybe we can make it more secure by doing this or that. There have been additions to the padlock symbol in the browser, so you know at least that the iframe is just as secure as the host website. But in the end, we kind of really just want to get rid of the iframe. Now, there have been other solutions that are used. You can use JavaScript. Some third parties are providing JavaScript SDKs that you just import into your host page. And then you tag a div with a class or an ID, and then startup time, the script will find where it needs to fit more content into, and it will do its thing. And then for certain reasons, people are also embedding their services by redirecting to pop-ups or to other pages. And sometimes this is for a security requirement. I'd like to propose, alongside these solutions, to use web components and to publish them as if they were an API, alongside your data API. And I say alongside the previous solutions because maybe this isn't a good fit for you at the moment. There are certain limitations that I'll talk to you about after doing a demo. And so maybe you still need to use an iframe for the next 5 years, as soon as web components catch up to your use case. So if you see something that just doesn't fit, then just don't try and use it, but maybe keep an open mind in the years to come and look back at what web components can do for you at that point. For those of you who don't know, web components are part of the platform. They're implemented in all the major web browsers. You can go to webcomponents.org to verify with a little table of all the different features that are part of the web component specs and see which browsers have implemented what, but it's pretty much green across the board except for a certain person that we will not mention. They're basically JavaScript modules served over HTTP. They implement custom HTML elements. They're basically like your JSP tag library, but for the client side. They provide a key feature, which is scoped CSS, which means that you don't have to worry about all the class overloading, and maybe my class will collide with your class, and all the CSS problems that you can encounter when you start getting a huge application. In fact, even just web components can be used, even if you're not consuming third-party APIs, just for that solution. And web components kind of expose an API through properties. They're like the attributes of an HTML element, and they allow two-way data binding between the interiors of the element and its exterior. There are people who are already publishing web components to consume their services. There's YouTube. You can either embed an iframe or you can use the web component. Google Maps is the same. GitHub are starting to experiment with web components, and Atlassian, Jira, and Confluence are starting to use web components more and more. And then also GDPR is getting on the bandwagon. There's a great JavaScript library that allows people to easily handle cookie consent, and someone has wrapped that library in a web component. So now time for a little demo so you can see up front what this would look like. Please join me in a quick prayer. So first of all, I'm going to show you just a rudimentary anatomy of what a web component is, how quickly you can set up, you can define and consume a web component and design it. So I'm going to merge in a quick initial structure. This initial structure gives me a basic JavaScript front-end project with a package.json. I'm using Polymer just to serve my web component for the moment because it helps solve certain problems with module resolution. But I'm not using Polymer to define my web components. I'm going to show you a library that is from the same team as Polymer, but it allows you to quickly define very lightweight web components. Now, there's a way to define them from scratch using only the functions that are in the platform directly, but it's very verbose, and the project called Lit Element here kind of accelerates the development of a web component without making it too big when you want to serve it up to your customers. So I'm going to use yarn to install that dependency. I've also defined a web page that we'll be using to embed our web component so that we can consume it. And then I have the basic definition of a very simple web component. As I said, it's a JavaScript module that is going to be loaded by the index.html. We load lit element to accelerate the development of the web component. And then we use we define and export a class that subclasses lit element. And the final piece of the puzzle, because we're defining a tag, we need to tell the browser that this class here is implementing a tag of a certain name. So we use the API window.customelements.define, and we give it a name, and that name has a certain constraint so that it doesn't collide, so that it's easy for the browser to understand what is a basic element and what is a custom element. You always have to have a dash in the name of your element. So let's have a look at this index. Okay, it's saying, hello, my element, but that isn't the actual element, it's just the basic text that I put on the page. We're not actually consuming the element yet. What we have to do is we have to import it into our page. And so that's a basic script import. We can, if we want, specify that it is a JavaScript module and not just a plain JavaScript file. It will impose strict mode and certain other constraints. Okay. All right, but we still don't have the element. Now we can just insert the element into the DOM. It looks just like any other element. It could be a div, but it just has a pretty name. All right, so that element is there. It's in the DOM, but it has no visual definition. So we're going to flesh this out. And the way we do that in lit elements is that we implement a function called render, and we return a bit of HTML. Now this import, this function here, if you look further at what template strings what can be done with template strings in JavaScript, you can also attach a sort of a pre-processing function onto that, and that's provided by lit element, which will allow us to do a few little data binding tricks inside. So let's give it some flesh. And let's see what happens. Hey, it's there. All right, this kind of workflow will be okay for a tutorial, but as if we're going to develop more and more web components and a fuller application, we're going to need a better strategy for doing the development of each of them, so that we don't have to reload the whole application every time we want to test a component, and then allow us also to test components in isolation with various different parameters and give test cases and examples. And there's a really cool tool called Storybook that allows us to do that. So I'm going to merge in some more code that's going to load up Storybook. What this does is it adds the dependency, a whole bunch of dependencies. I've added also a command to launch Storybook. Storybook is going to serve on its own web server locally, and then we'll be able to load that up and see different elements in different scenarios that we will define. I've also got some configuration here, some basic configuration, and I'm also adding in some add-ons that we'll see later. So I need to install those dependencies and then launch Storybook. Takes a while to build. What it's going to do is it's going to build our files. It's going to use Webpack and Babel to transpile them. And then it's going to bring up this UI. And in the UI, you will see that it will bring up certain scenarios, what it calls stories. It's a book of stories. And there's a simple API to define your stories. I'm also using lit element, lit HTML to define the HTML part of our story. And basically what I do is just like the index HTML, I import my element. I give a title to my story. And then I give it a name, give a certain scenario, and basically I'm just using the element. So we should see the hello from my element. Now, it may be a little bit too small, so I'm going to add a little bit of styling, basic styling to it. Let's see what that does. And so dynamically, as I'm changing and saving the code, it's being rebuilt by Webpack, and it's being served up again by Storybook. So that's a little bit easier to see. Okay, maybe I'm going to make my element a little bit more complex. I don't just want a message, I want a button as well. So that way it'll be interactive. Okay, I look at my scenario and I see it's not taking into account the font size. And that's because it's being protected by some of the scoping that the web element provides. Okay, well maybe I'm going to specify in my story, no, I really want the buttons to have that same font and font size. Okay, let's look. It doesn't work. Again, the rule that I'm giving for button outside of the element is not being taken into account inside. We won't inspect that now. So what can I do? How can I theme more parts of this element? Well, one way I could do it is I could declare a property. But then that would be going back into the dark ages of the web before CSS existed, and you used font tags and style tags directly. What I want to do is I want to use CSS. And so to do this, I'm going to use something that was added to the platform a few years ago, which is called variables. I can pass variables into the web component, and that web component can consume them and place them in certain parts of the inner CSS. So I'm going to define, we'll do it in a TDD style. Now I'm not going to define this variable on the button, I'm going to define it on the element itself. So I can actually put in my CSS some styling rules for the custom element. I'm going to declare a variable. All variables start with dash dash. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to scope my variables with the prefix my dash. In this case, I want the button font to be configurable. All right, so that's not doing anything at the moment. We need to change our definition here and add a style tag inside our component. It's going to set the font of the button using the variable that maybe somebody has declared. Call it. Hey, it works. And so that variable becomes part of the API and should be documented. And that's a basic way that we can start theming things. But maybe there isn't just the font that we want to change on that button. We want to change the background color. We want to change the padding so that it gives a little bit more, takes up a little bit more space. We want to change the color of the text. We want to change oodles of things. There are so many CSS properties that we can configure on a button. Are we going to really declare variables for all of those properties, for all of the customizable elements inside our web component, and do that for each web component? You can see that that quickly does not scale. And so a while back, there was a proposal to use something called @apply, where inside a CSS declaration, you could sort of mix in a variable declaration that would declare a whole bunch of properties. That was scrapped for reasons that are explained on a certain blog post, if you look, and was replaced with something called parts. Parts are now part of the platform, and allows you to specify that there are certain parts of your web component that can be customizable at will. So the way you declare that is that it's a new selector. Let's say I want to change the background color of my button and make it bright red because that looks cool. Well, it doesn't do anything because the web component hasn't declared that there's a part button. So there's a new attribute now for all elements, which is part equals, and you give it a name. And that will allow the outside, the host, to configure just about anything on that button. So now not only I can make the background red, I can add a little padding. I can make the foreground white because that'll clash a little less with the red. I can change the border because it's looking a little bit too 90s. And maybe I'll give it some rounded edges just for kicks. Looks cool. Okay, let's get into a bigger use case. Let's say we're developing an application for a business. This prospective business is a fan of bricks that interlock with each other. They call themselves the Brick Builders, and they've just designed this cool website, which is the MVP. And they're going to look to grow this MVP by integrating third-party API and UI fragments. So let's have a look at this. I'm using Polymer to define the web components in this. And I basically have a standard application structure where I have a couple pages in a progressive web app. And I have a design style. You'll see where I took my inspiration from very quickly when I show the demo. And this is the style that I want to be able to apply to the third-party UI elements. So I have a whole color palette, I have fonts, font sizes, and certain little twerks that I want to be able to apply to certain elements. So let's have a look at what this is. All right, this is the cool website for the brick builders. Simple description, landing page kind of thing. And then what brick builders do is they want to bring more people to the community so that more people can be locking bricks until all the bricks are interlocked. That's their mission. So they have various different workshops that they run. And for the MVP, they thought, well, we're just going to have a button with a phone number to call if somebody's interested in attending a workshop. If you're on a mobile phone, you click on that, it redirects to the phone call. But it's not enough. They're not getting the uptake that they want. And so they think, well, maybe we need to use a chatbot. Because chatbots are cool. I'm not going to build a chatbot. There are already people who are providing chatbots for me. But I want to be able to go quickly. I just want to be able to bring in their UI elements, style them up a bit, and boom, I'm there. And so a chatbot provider comes along and says, here's what you need. We developed a cool web component, and let's have a look at what it can look like. So we're using Storybook to document our API of UI elements. That didn't work because I'm in the wrong directory. All right, yes, we do have that. So, here it is. Wow, that looks very unimpressive. No, but wait, we can customize it. It's okay. In Storybook, you can also set up, as part of one of the add-ons, is these knobs that you can turn. And so you can customize within Storybook the look and feel. So maybe it's not Arial, the font that you want Roboto for everything. Maybe you don't want things to be quite that size, you want them to be much bigger. And that's for the text size. Wow, that's big. Okay, well, the color's not quite to my liking. I want a little bit darker, blue. The foreground isn't good. And also the API isn't running, so that's why I'm not getting a response. Okay, so now we should get some response. Hey. Oh, it's asking me the question. That's weird. What's interlocking? Interlocking bricks is our mission at Brick Builders. Very good. Still not quite working how I want. I want there to be a little bit of padding in between the questions and the responses. I also want slightly different text. Maybe I want to internationalize my send button. Okay, that's possible. All right, so we're starting to get something, but we can't quite do everything with the knobs that have been declared. There are parts that are declared on the different elements, the different parts of this component, and we'll be able to theme them through the API, the styling API that is provided and that is documented elsewhere. Okay, so let's try and integrate this. So the client is sold. Okay, how do we integrate this into our website? Well, it's easy. All we have to do is import the JavaScript module that we're serving alongside our API, and then put it somewhere in your DOM, and boom. All right then, so where is this being served? It's being served on localhost 8080. and it's being served at a location called static/chatbot.js. And then the element is called chatbot conversation, and we're going to stick it sort of at the foot of the DOM, and you'll see that it'll be floating on the right. I'll zoom out a little bit. And here it is. It's very unassuming at the moment because it hasn't been customized, but it's there. And it should work, because it doesn't work because I haven't specified the URL that it's supposed to hit. So I specified the URL for where the web component is, but the web component also needs the URL for the API. And I do this by configuring a property on the tag. All right, then this should work better. Okay, I ask it about brick builders. It says very little. It's a very simple chatbot. I didn't have time to make it respond to more complicated questions, but it works. Okay, but it isn't very stylish. So what can we do? Well, there are a couple parts that have been defined on this, so I just need to configure those parts. There's a part that is going to style the questions that are asked by the user. There's a part that is going to style the answers. There's a part that's going to style the little input box. And there's a part that's going to style the button. Now, for speed's sake, I'm going to merge in some code that I've already prepared. Also going to forget this code, git stash. So let's have a look at what that does. So I'm going to theme the element itself with a few variables to configure some background, foreground colors. I'm going to give a little bit more of a look and feel to the questions and the answers. You'll see by using some border radius effects that will allow us to identify a bit better which direction the conversation is going. I'm also going to style the input so that it will use the proper text and proper text size. It'll have a nice little color surrounding the text. And then the button itself as well, I'm going to make it comply with the font face that I want, the size that I want, give it a more bold face, give it the proper color from my color palette, take away the border and give it as well a border radius so that everything looks and feels just like it's part of my application. And we go from this very ugly thing to something a little nicer. Boom. Voila, that was pretty quick. If you want to check out the code later, there's another example of adding GDPR cookie consent into that as well. But it basically follows the same lines. You import a JavaScript module. You look at the API description to see what properties you need to configure and what variables and what parts of the UI you can theme. But basically, it's quite quick and easy. There are a few little gotchas. Since we're serving things and importing things from different origins, you have to make sure that your API and whatever's serving your UI elements is setting the right cause headers. you also have to be careful, since you're importing modules from other origins, that those modules don't clash with your dependency tree. And the best way, I think, to deal with that is to use rollup, so that you can roll all the dependencies into a contained package that won't get out, that won't escape your module. And that way you're definitely sure that only what the user wants to see in their view is what they will get. They won't collide with different versions of a similar dependency you might have used. And the final thing is to be careful of load size and performance. I saw a tweet recently that said maybe some people should be testing their web applications on the train when they're using 3G or even worse. I think that lit element gives a good balance between the package size that you're going to be delivering, but also provides a little bit better developer experience than if you're defining your elements from scratch. In conclusion, using this solution, we have UI fragments that are delivered as if they were APIs, and they can allow customers to interact more easily with our third-party APIs. They're themable, they look seamless to the end user. And also, one of the added bonuses is that using Storybook, for instance, to design your API, not only is it giving you better feedback, but it's also allowing you to maybe expose that as documentation. There are also, if you look at the help for Storybook, there's even a command to generate static documentation from various scenarios. How can we go further from this? This may not fit all the use cases, and that's because there are a few added things that we need to think about and develop. But I think if we're aware of this as a community, we can start working on them and allow them to suit your use cases better. There's a whole slew of things about security. We basically have a similar situation with iframes than we do with web components. There's also a problem of trust. If we're going to be providing web components to embed authentication into another application or even payment, how are we going to trust? Who do we trust with the information that's going to be flowing? Since the host application is going to be able to see pretty easily with some JavaScript magic the data that's going to be flowing into your web components. There are some things where you can, instead of just giving a full-blown component and then try and customize the parts, you could also give the full-blown component for those who want to start out, and then also provide on the side the smaller components, because we can see that in the example, okay, yes, I can customize the look and feel of these of this chatbot, but I can't say that I want the conversation to go from the top to the bottom. So maybe for more complicated design issues, we can just provide the little parts that the customer can integrate themselves. And we can go further with providing many different things, like maybe cool animations that people can integrate. There's not necessarily an API behind it, but we can just sort of deliver these UI APIs to accelerate certain things for our customers. Thank you for listening, and I think I have time for maybe one question. Yes? Yes, so how do you share data? The question is, how do you share data and events between the custom element and the host? So we saw that there are properties on the that you can configure on a component. That can be data bound to data in the host application. And Polymer does a great job of adding the syntax for that. And you can also define in custom elements, you can define custom events that outsiders can listen to. So it's not just on click, on this, on that. With a chatbot, we can define an event like on question, on response, that are more in line with the business needs. Thank you again for listening. Please give me some feedback.